Rampaging to your heart's content, going fast to vehicles that can't quite handle the impact when you inevitably lose control, the relentless, unforgiving grind. These are all the things one thinks of when someone mentions the prolific franchise Grand Theft Auto. But there is one other aspect of these games that is arguably just as important as any of those other things I mentioned. That's right, the radio. The radio has always been an important part of the Grand Theft Auto franchise. From the streets of Liberty City to the shores of Los Santos, your rampant and exhilarating crimes are never too far away from the perfect soundtrack.
Oh my god!
But if you played these games enough, you know that the radio is far more important than just what genres each station holds. And today, I'm going to be talking about how the radio went from being a clever way of implementing a soundtrack to the beating heart of the city. Let's find out together if I follow through with that last statement. Rockstar and DMA Design have put a ton of attention into their car radios ever since the debut of GTA in 1997. Even if they couldn't license popular hits for their games, the designers decided that a representation of American radio was an important inclusion to their vision of Liberty City. To this end, the very first GTA featured 7 different stations featuring radio-friendly original music made by fictional bands. But to subvert your expectations of a typical soundtrack, they break up the songs with quips from the fictional DJ host, weather and news reports, and the occasional skit. In GTA 2, they brought back the radio, and while they expanded on it, upgrading their 7 stations to 11, expanding on the DJs, having proximity-based radios, and introducing the commercial parodies, they added a much-needed quality of life change, the ability to actually change what station you're tuned into. This is such a vital factor in maintaining any semblance of realism in a car, and a mainstay in all radios and video games, even outside of GTA, that it's crazy to think that it didn't exist before this game. Beyond this though, perhaps foreshadowing the importance of outside labels and musicians on the radios and future games, there were contributions made to the soundtrack by real-life electronic music label Moving Shadow, who would go on to provide music to Midnight Club and Grand Theft Auto 3, which we'll get to in a second. And a second later, here we are in Grand Theft Auto 3. The shift to 3 dimensions might have been the largest difference pioneered in GTA 3, but don't let that distract you from the many developments made in the sound department. One major thing that started to take form here was the growing number of tracks that were contributed by real-life artists, although many of the songs were still written specifically for the soundtrack. Virtually none of the contributing real artists were particularly well known at the time, and appearing on such a popular video game was no doubt greatly advantageous to their careers. The game also contains about 3.5 hours of diverse materials made to recreate the sensation of skipping through real-life radio stations. Among those 3.5 hours, we see the introduction of Chatterbox Fm, the first talk radio in the series, the inclusion of real-life DJs, and the biggest thing added, the ability to put your own songs into the game under the MP3 player on PC and the CD changer on Xbox. All of these things serve to characterize the specific tone that the GTA series is known for, and by this point, the radio had increasingly become a powerful tool used to help contextualize the setting of the game, and this tool is especially put to use in the next big release, Grand Theft Auto Vice City. The game takes place in 1986, so the bulk of the soundtrack is, of course, from the 1980s. To do this, Vice City is pretty much entirely licensed music, featuring only 5 original songs out of the total 113. And including these tracks, we have over 9 hours of content with 2 talk radio stations this time, containing about 3 times the content of its predecessor, and expanded commercials tailored to fit into the 80s era. Later games in this series set in an earlier period also follow this model, most notably the sequel to this game, San Andreas, which takes place in the 90s. But Rockstar wasn't content with keeping things the same as before and continued to look for ways to improve the listening experience in a way to keep it realistic and eternally fresh. You see, up until this point, each radio station was basically a single audio file that would play from start to finish. So everything you heard on the radio would be in essentially the same order every time it looped. But in San Andreas, for the first time ever, every single piece of music, DJ commentary, commercial, and anything on the radio was randomized, so no 2 listens would be quite the same. And some stations even had breaking news as you advance throughout the story, referencing events occurring within the game. So now we're at Grand Theft Auto 4, and by this point, Rockstar was making literal Rockstar money, and the increase in budget let them flex their licensing muscle a bit. You see, Liberty City is stocked with 19 radios that Nico can tune into, containing over 200 songs. And although GTA 4 lacks any major innovations to the radio, they expand on San Andreas' randomization and even add in announcements for each and every song, along with some taxicab commentary from Nico. And back to the flexing, many real celebrities even provide voices for the DJs in the game, including such names as Iggy Pop, Bill Hader, Opie and Anthony, and Fred Armisen. And although Rockstar took the curated quantity over everything approach, they still put love into the radio, especially in terms of how it interacted with the player in the world. And all of this was enough to earn IGN's Best Use of Sound Overall award in 2008, but obviously Rockstar wasn't about to rest on its laurels. So here we are at Grand Theft Auto 5, the latest game in the series, and if 4 went for the quantity over everything approach, 5 chose to have his cake and eat it too. In fact, in addition to its boisterous radio, it was the first game in the mainline series to have an original cinematic score to accompany the diegetic or in-universe music that you would hear on the radio. And despite the fact that the only real innovation sound-wise had nothing really to do with the radio, it certainly wasn't neglected. They were working with enhanced Rockstar money and they went crazy with the licensing of songs. Music supervisor Ivan Pavlovich said that they originally aimed to have 900 songs and were licensing as many songs as they could. But they knew that cramming a whole bunch of songs into the game wouldn't achieve that cohesive, immersive sound they were looking for. And out of those 900 songs, they trimmed the fat and got it down to a nice 241 tracks, split across 17 radio stations. And speaking of the radio stations, instead of solely relying on the novelty of having real-life celebrities host your radio station, they instead handpicked each host based on the style of the station, such as having Kenny Loggins host the classic rock station, Bootsy Collins host the funk station, and Flying Lotus host the Flying Lotus station. And while the previous games achieved a certain level of immersion and realism with the radio, this was the first game to truly utilize their setting, in-game and out, in order to create an experience that would both emulate a real-life Philly feel, along with creating a certain depth to their world. The biggest example of this was the creation of Nonstop Pop Station, the first actual pop station in GTA, with Pavlovich saying, "The first time you get off an airplane in LA and you hear the radio and the pop just seeps out, we wanted that. It really connects you to the world." They wanted a distinct West Coast Californian feel with the radio, and this required a much larger focus on the music than ever seen before, creating an experience unmatched by any game in the series and perhaps any game out there. So, from having fake bands and pretend DJs to real artists becoming DJs, we've gone from a glorified soundtrack trying to emulate the real thing to something arguably even more entertaining and user-connected than its real-life counterpart. And through looking at this mechanic, we can see how the things we hear affect our experience and long-lasting enjoyment of a game, even if it's sort of in the background. And beyond that, as Rockstar made success after success, we can see that improvements could be made to all aspects of a game and that even the littlest things could be improved upon. But I've rambled about the radio long enough, so let's wrap this up. If you liked the video, be sure to like and subscribe and let me know down in the comments below your thoughts on GTA's radio. What kind of songs did you put in your self radio? What's your favorite moment involving the radio? Mine is definitely the first time I heard my character stumble through Take On Me in Saints Row 2. But before you change the station, have a good day.